Good evening. Welcome to another edition of the show tonight. And tonight we're very lucky to have as a guest the president of the Mamaroneck Community Environmental Coalition, which is a new group that's formed in the village to promote sensible development all over the community, but particularly in the Hampshire area. Miss Celia Felsha. Celia, how are you?
Hi, I'm fine. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming. Celia is known to the community. She did a lot of. She was the president of the school board for years, on the school board for years, and now she's, giving her time to sort out some of the development issues.
Right.
Can you just explain to us, the impetus behind MCEC and?
So the impetus was in connection with the publication of plans for the development of Hampshire, and then understanding what impact that would have on the community, both directly around the Hampshire area and then more broadly speaking throughout the village of Mamaroneck. Hampshire, just to give people a little background, had been for decades a membership golf club with tennis and a pool facility. It was started in the 1920s, became Hampshire sometime in the 1940s as a continuation of another entity, and has operated as a membership club for all that time. In the downturn back in 2009 and 2010, it ran into terrible economic trouble, and it was bought in a fire sale by distressed real estate developers, which at the time said they were buying it solely to operate the club, but clearly intended to develop it.
Right.
The club has 117 acres, and the property was purchased for $12 million, which is about $100,000 an acre, which is really a cheap and distressed price. The owners are really two groups. One is a private equity fund that specializes in distressed real estate investment called Westport Capital, which is based out of Westport, Connecticut, with investors that are institutional and large kind of capital providers.
Could I just touch on that for a second?
Sure.
So Westport Capital, and correct me if I'm wrong, but an organization like that, their main function is to come in, buy a property, flip it quickly, make money, and get out.
Well, what they do is these type of investment funds normally have something like 8, 9, 10-year life cycles. And they might have a 3 to 4 year investment period. So they need to realize their investment, not necessarily flipping it immediately, but they need to be able to get out within a period of, say, 5 to 8 years.
Okay.
So that might be their time horizon. They put in probably about 90 to 95% of the money to buy the investment, and they are investors with some control over the project. They then tend to partner with a local developer. In this case, it's something called New World Realty, the public face of which people have seen all around, is Dan Pfeffer, who actually lives in Larchmont. They've developed projects nationally, and they would have put in a very small amount of money. The way the economics work is if there is a home run with a huge financial gain, then the people who put the money in, Westport, will get back their money plus a return, but that's where the developers will make a fortune.
Okay.
And that's what is really going on here. The property was purchased at a very low price because it was a distressed time, but also because the property is zoned for residential housing, and it is in a floodplain that has flooded horrendously and can't be developed. And that's why the price was reflected.
The golf course is zoned for residential.
Right.
But the area where the club is zoned marine recreation.
So there are, of the 117 acres, there are a small number of acres right around the clubhouse that are zoned marine recreation, which is similar to what Orienta Beach is, Mamaroneck Beach and Yacht, and then there's a sister type of zoning called Mamaroneck Marine Coastal, which is what Nichols Boatyard is, and a few other places.
Marine commercial, marine recreational, right.
And those were places that were carved out to make sure that the pre-existing uses, because again, the club started in the 1920s, long before there was residential zoning. When the residential zoning came up, they had to figure out what to do with this thing that didn't fit into a residence. And so they created these marine recreation and marine commercial uses that said it had to be used by membership clubs, no commercial activity or very limited. And that allowed them to basically be grandfathered for their use in an otherwise residential community.
And it also allowed them to have other functions to supplement the club, like to have certain
They could,
catering functions.
right. So if they had,
club,
if they obtained certain special permits, then they are allowed to have a small amount of supplemental activity, such as catering, bar mitzvahs,
Right.
or weddings. It can be no more than 20% of the total
Right.
activity if they've gotten the special permit. Now, one thing is that Hampshire is in violation of many of the zoning rules now. It's not a not-for-profit
Right.
membership club. It doesn't have a special permit. It actually engages in much more commercial activity than is permitted. But that's a different issue.
Well, let's get to what are they proposing to do now?
So what they're proposing to do is to build around the clubhouse, because that is the one higher elevation area of any size on the golf course, a massive luxury condominium complex. It's proposed to have between 120 and 125 units of some one, but mostly 2 and 3 bedroom sizes. It would have a 250 car underground garage, and it would also maintain its parking lots on the parking surface. By the way, that square footage, which is about 300,000 square feet of space above ground, you can liken it to, say, 3 average Home Depots.
Okay.
Home Depot, on average, if you go to their website, has about 100,000 square feet.
So we're talking gigantic.
We're talking gigantic, massive, right in the middle of a residential community, and within, a few yards of and right up against a very delicate inlet to Delancey Cove from the Sound.
And just so for folks that aren't familiar with the area, what is around there now is single-family homes,
So that's right.
modest size.
Right around it is single-family homes, some nice size, some modest size, and the zoning is half-acre lots.
Right.
And then there is the golf course. At the other end of the golf course, there are the Fairway Greens, Fairway Green townhouses.
Right.
So that's the nature of the community. It is quiet. There are only 2 roads that lead to the clubhouse now. One, and this is one of the major issues, one is off of Boston Post Road. You come around the Hummock School and then go up Eagle Knolls Road, which is small and windy, and a private road that goes up on one side. On the other side, there's Orienta Avenue, which then comes across on Cove Road,
Yeah, which is private.
which
too.
is private also. The traffic generated by this around the Hummock School will be very, very significant and relatively dangerous.
And anyone who's ever dropped off a kid at Hummocks in the morning.
You know what a nightmare that
Yeah.
is. Either coming down Weaver, coming up Boston Post Road, either at pickup or drop-off times, or even when there are games on the
Right.
weekends, it becomes very difficult. There's also that very dangerous bend around Hummock School. So traffic is a big issue. The club was trying to deal with it. They thought at one point of creating a new road that would cut through the golf course out Cooper Avenue, but that fell by the wayside. So traffic is a big issue. Another issue is precedent for the community, and what does this mean? You're taking property to, and we'll get to it, but really solely to give the developer a windfall.
Right.
This does nothing for the community, and I'll get to that in a minute because of the
financial
arguments about the
implications,
financial
yeah.
impacts are actually negative, probably not positive.
I just want to point out something just from my own perspective. This will be basically a large development on when it rains and floods on an island.
Right.
And I mean, I was a trustee here in the village of Mamaroneck in 2007 when we had a huge flood down in the Washingtonville
Right.
area. And there was a point during that flood when the Avalon had a problem.
Right.
The Avalon, they thought they smelled gas. And I'll never forget the fire chief who was at the command center turned to me and he said, "We can't get there, we can't handle this."
Yeah.
Because the water was so high. And you're putting people in harm's way.
You really are.
And then you put our men who volunteer in harm's way.
So talking about flooding, what I'd like to talk about then is the flooding on Hampshire,
Okay.
which is a significant issue. As you'll be able to see, and there'll be something that comes up on the screen, a snapshot from the U.S. Geological Survey, which actually provided flood maps of everywhere along the coast following Sandy. And you'll see there is a visual of the flooding at Hampshire right after Sandy. 80% of the golf course was flooded. There was a storm surge that came over from the inlet behind the Hummock School, over Hummocks Road, into the golf course, across Eagle Nose, and completely filled the golf course. The club was isolated at the time. Eagle Nose was flooded on one side, and there's another picture you can look at here, which is of a truck 2 days later trying to cross Eagle Nose toward the clubhouse. You can see the flooding. On the other side,
Even 2 days later.
Yeah, on the other side, Orienta and Cove Road were flooded as well, so that was completely isolated. Around the Hummocks was flooded also, so you couldn't even have gotten into the area at all. In 1992, there was a similar storm surge from a nor'easter, which people may remember. The same thing happened. At that point, there was a man who lived in the community who was trying to get around the club. His car was washed off. He was then pulled by the force of the water into the golf course, and he drowned. Wow. We're now talking about putting 120 or 125 units, some of them large. They may have families, they may have older people, and you've got to figure out how you would rescue them in a situation like that. There could be a gas leak. In Sandy, there was a gas leak on Old Hummocks Road in the back, and the trucks couldn't get through because of that flooding from the area behind. And we were watching the firemen trying to figure out if they could wade through and up to check the gas leak. The developers say that they have all kinds of systems now, maybe some seawalls that they could build. The underground parking garage may have James Bond type hermetically sealed steel trap doors that can come up and close with the press of a switch. And I think that what people have recognized since Sandy is that, and even the developer's water expert had said at a meeting, water does always win.
Yes, it does.
And it takes down seawalls, as we know from the community.
From Katrina.
From Katrina, and it is a very dangerous situation. Yes. There are also the precedential issues of rezoning. If you rezone, what happens then when the next person comes in and wants to rezone one of the other clubs, or Nichols Boatyard, or Directors, or, to tell you the truth, you could say in a residential area, let's say up around here, right around the library, someone can buy up 6 houses and say, I want to build a multifamily structure here. It's a similar concept of, well, if we like it and if it's going to provide something, let's go ahead and rezone that area and build an apartment building.
You know what? It's always important to remember is that zoning was, the whole concept of zoning was to enable communities to protect themselves from overdevelopment. It isn't there to give the developer the most return on his money.
Right. What zoning is, I think that's a really good point, Tom. It is a way for communities to identify and figure out what rational development is.
It's a statement about their character, too.
It's a statement about the character, what should be located in what neighborhoods. There is a need for, and there should be, commercially zoned areas, high-density zoning. The Avalon is an example of that. I mean, flooding aside, there are places where development like that is appropriate and consistent, but not in this particular place.
I want to hit on the economic impact and the economic impact to the community at large.
So the developer has said, oh, this will increase tax revenues and therefore it's good for the village. So what we did was, we at Mamaroneck Coastal, we actually have hired various experts, one of which was a financial firm that does this type of analysis on a regular basis. Meaning an analysis of what is the economic impact of a particular proposed development on the tax base of a community.